Chapter 15. The Doctor looked up apprehensively at the massive granite buildings which formed the skeet of Kandassi, all of them featureless and functional, apart from the ornate death's head which crowned each one. There was no sign of life anywhere. He switched on his radiation detector which, as before, was beeping furiously. Suddenly the sound changed to a high-pitched whine which almost deafened him. He switched it off hurriedly and read the readings displayed on the LCD counter. For several moments it had detected an inordinate rush of Artron energy, which had now levelled off to the normal levels for this planet. The Doctor looked up thoughtfully at the arrow-shaped aerial which towered above him on the summit of the hill. A loud crash and creaking of doors made him hurry behind a corner and duck for cover. Streaming down from the buildings at the top of the hill came a band of 40 or so companions, all tall and heavily armed and chattering excitedly amongst themselves. They marched directly towards a fleet of 3 silver craft which lay at the foot of the hill. Following them were 6 old men and women dressed in long flowing habits and skull caps. Their faces were fixed and stern, and they were silent as they walked down to the 3 waiting cars. At last the Pangistery, thought the Doctor, and as the air cars rose and sped off down towards the harbour, he wondered what had finally brought them to Kirith. As the day had progressed in Kirith town, so more and more of the people had been convinced by the words of Tanyel and her fellow teachers. When Kraz had returned from the Darkfell and brought back with him several of the unlike, the Kirithans could finally see with their own eyes the price they had had to pay for the life of ease the Pangistery had given them. And yet it was not just the unmasking of the true nature of the Pangistery which fired their passion and anger. For the first time in centuries, the people of Kirith were hungry. Zavat was their lifeline. It was provided for them on a daily basis in all its different forms. They had become so dependent on their regular supply that they had never thought of storing it, nor had they ever learnt to grow and cultivate efficiently fruit and vegetables. Now, after only a day of being deprived of food, their stomachs were empty and they were beginning to panic, wondering where their next meal was coming from. The thought of Lord Huldar and his cronies, secure in the council house dining on fresh meats and vegetables, made them even angrier. Tanyel and Kraz had elected not to reveal the main constituent of the Kirithans' staple diet. The knowledge that for centuries the Kirithans had been eating the reprocessed remains of their own people would have been too much for many to bear. Some of those with stronger, more free-thinking minds were also beginning to remember the things which the Zavat had conveniently helped them to forget. People began to question the disappearance of loved ones and relatives. Some older people, like Miril before them, wondered why they had no memory of their parents or grandparents. There were, however, those who clung tightly to their blind, unquestioning faith in the Pangistery. These were not just the ones who had gained most from the matriarch's people. They were also timid, honest folk who feared the future and were contented to carry on with the comfortable life they had always known. What if the Pangistery did experiment on a few misfits and lowlifes? At least they fed them well. While these people stayed in their homes waiting for the storm of dissent to abate, others climbed the road leading to where the throng gathered in the square before the council house, shouting their demands up to the brethren. In a high window the burly figure of Huldar looked nervously out. The crowd jeered and demanded that he come out and speak to them. Huldar turned back to Revna. "Something must be done soon, my lord," she said. "Don't you think I don't know that?" he snapped. "When will food supplies be restored?" Revna checked her files. "Several days," she said flatly. "All the programs were lost when Ace wiped the systems." She neglected to mention that she had deliberately delayed the start of the reprogramming by several hours. Huldar had lost touch in his later days. He wouldn't notice. Huldar looked bemused. "I've done so much for them, Revna, ensured that they got the best of everything. I loved them like my own children. Why are they now turning against me?" "Perhaps because the only person you've ever loved was yourself, and loyalty's not an attractive option when your stomach is empty," thought Revna. "What will you do, Lord?" she asked. "I don't know," he said despairingly, and tried once more to contact Kandassi on the video link-up. The screen was filled with static. "What should I do, Pangistery? What should I do?" Revna looked at the Lord Procurator with thinly veiled disdain. Ace, Raphael, Aaron and Myrrel crouched behind a heather-topped hillock near the harbours, watching the Pandristry and the companions disembark from the hovercraft. The companions already stationed at the harbours welcomed them. "I've never seen the Pandristry arrive in such force before," said Myrrel. "What are they doing here?" "Obvious, isn't it?" said Ace. "Hulda's called them to put down the unrest." "We've got to get back then," said Raphael, instinctively rising to his feet. "Taniel will need our help." Aaron pulled him roughly down again. "Do you want to get a shot?" she said. "We go on to Kandassi." "We have to find the Professor, Raphael," said Ace as he began to protest. "He's the only one who can help us." Meekly, Raphael agreed. For the second night, the people of Kirith had no food, heat or light. Attempts had been made to break down the doors of the council house, but, like those of the seminary, the massive doors had been built to withstand even the strongest attack. Still, Hulda had not come out to speak to his people, despite their insistence. He sat in his offices, unblinking, stunned at his subject's volte-face. There was a large part of Hulda that truly believed that everything he had done was for the good of the Kirithans. If he could also do himself and his friends good along the way, then what of it? Their rebellion was simply beyond his comprehension. Stripped of his power and apparently without the support and guiding light of Reptu and the Pandristry, the Lord Huldar was a lost man. Revna, meanwhile, was supervising the reprogramming of all the computers, allowing none of the programmers rest until their task was finished. They worked like automata, scarcely understanding what they were doing and merely following the instructions taught to them by the Pandristry years ago. She returned to Huldar to report on the progress and found him once again standing at the window. This time, however, there was joy and relief on his face. He urged her to look. Down below in the streets, pandemonium reigned. People were scattering in all directions, screaming and howling in disbelief as 40 armed companions rushed into the square from each side, firing their bullets aimlessly into the crowd. Kirithans pushed each other aside in their blind panic, showing no respect for age or infirmity as they ran to save their own lives. All over the square people were dropping, blood, brains and guts tumbling from their bodies as the companions' bullets and shells hit them. Others scrambled over their corpses to seek refuge in the tiny adjacent streets. The 6 Pandristry followed, their faces sombre and unfeeling as they surveyed the carnage and watched the crowd disperse. A gang of Kirithans, more foolhardy than the rest, attempted to confront one of the companions. A female Pandristry raised a hand, and a chunk of masonry detached itself from a nearby building, crushing to death both the companion and its attackers. One Kirithan, running blindly into another Pandristry, watched in horror as the seemingly frail old woman crushed his arm into a bloody pulp. Within minutes it was over, an efficient and coldly emotionless extermination of those who had dared to defy the Pandristry. There was no trace of triumph in their faces. It was simply a job that had to be done. As the smoke cleared, the 6 Pandristry beckoned their companions to follow them to the council house, whose doors Hulda had already ordered to be opened. Behind them they left a pile of corpses and the bitter metallic smell of freshly spilt blood. Disgusting, thought Revna, as she turned away from the window and the bile rose in her throat. Ace and her 3 companions looked warily around the hovercraft which the Pandristry had left in the bay. Like the harbours, it too was empty. The Pandristry had seen no reason to put a guard on it. "Do you know how to work this thing?" asked Ace. Aaron returned from examining the controls in the small cabin. "I saw the Pandristry operate it when I worked here. I understand the basics, yes," she replied. "Well, what are we waiting for? Let's go!" Tentatively, Aaron touched the controls. Gently the engines thrummed into life, and the hovercraft moved slowly out of the harbours, its destination the island of Kandassi. "Right into the lion's den," thought Ace. Within minutes of their entering the council house, the Pandristry had instructed that the brethren should not leave the building. The armed companions were put on guard to protect them from any further insurrection. Ignoring the effusive greetings of Huldar, the 6 Pandristry immediately demanded that Revna lead them up to the computer rooms, where they then coolly dismissed her programmers. Revna stood back, open-mouthed, as she marvelled at the skill and the speed with which they reprogrammed and restored all the programs which Ace had destroyed. Within half an hour, lights all over Kirith blazed back on. In the vaults of the council house, the distribution machines responsible for Zavat whirred and clunked back into life. A Pangistri looked up from his terminal. "All will be as it was before," he stated coldly. "Your power systems are now running as they should. Food supplies will be resumed within the hour." Revna bowed her head in thanks. "I am grateful for the munificence of—" she began. "Thanks are unnecessary," interrupted the Pangistri. "Your welfare is all that concerns us. Now please lead us to the Lord Procurator Huldar." Revna led them to Huldar's office, where the Lord Procurator welcomed them once again. He wrung his hands obsequiously. "We are eternally grateful for your opportune intervention, my lords," he began, but the Pangistri silenced him. "The Earthchild has eluded your grasp again, Huldar, putting our entire mission in great danger. But the revolt should never have been allowed to progress this far. But I tried to contact you," he pleaded. "The communication systems were not working. We entrusted you with great power. You have abused that in pandering to your own whims and desires and not caring for the people as you should." "But haven't I carried out all your plans?" "The people distrust you, Huldar. That lack of faith in you destabilizes Kirith and endangers our mission. Therefore, we have no further use for you." Huldar's face turned white as he realized he was being made a scapegoat. He trembled uncontrollably as the 6 Pangistri surrounded him. He looked over to Revna, who was standing in the doorway. "Revna, help me!" Revna turned her face away. The eyes of the Pangistri, usually so weak and misty grey, glowed with green fire. Huldar screamed in horrible agony. When the Pangistri stepped aside, there was nothing left of Huldar but a boiling, steaming grey glob of matter. The Pangistri walked to the door, but before leaving stopped and turned to Revna. "Revna, you were right in contacting us when you did. Huldar obviously thought he could deal with the situation on his own." "At your service, my lord," she said, feeling in her pocket for the circuit she had stolen from the video link, thereby ensuring that Huldar couldn't contact his masters himself. "The companions are to remain here to ensure that never again will such a calamity occur." "Of course. We now leave for Kandassi. Let us not have to come to Kirith under such circumstances again. I assure you all will be well. Farewell, Lord Procurator Revna." A new day dawned on Kirith town. In the square the bodies had been cleared away. People awoke as though from a bad dream, scarcely believing what had happened. Some said that it had indeed been nothing but a dream, some sort of mass hallucination. Most preferred not to think about it. But some people remembered, and looked at their neighbours in a slightly different light, reminding themselves exactly what role they had played in the great debacle of the previous night. Revna declared a general amnesty. Such was the generosity of the Pangistri that all transgressions would be forgiven and forgotten. The people of Kirith were blessed with the most understanding of rulers. A feast day was declared. The seminarians, now halved in number, rang the great bell, calling the people to the festival. Wine flowed and mountains of food were consumed. A wondrous, joyous time was had by all. The people of Kirith had everything they could ever ask for, and life was good. The noise of the celebrations reached even to the Darkfell, where Tanyol, Kraz, and others who had escaped the massacre had sought refuge with the unlike. They looked at each other grimly. They had each other now. The first battle was over. They were determined it would not be the last.